close your eyes and let us drift back to a land unlike any other, a land where golden sands stretch to the horizon, where the great river Nile cuts a silver path through the desert, bringing life to an otherwise barren world. Here, under skies of burning sun and endless stars, the people of ancient Egypt built their temples and their tombs, their stories and their songs. And here, among the shifting dunes and timeless stone, their gods walked. The ancient Egyptians saw the world not as chaos, but as a delicate balance. They called it Ma'at, truth, harmony, justice, and order. Every breath, every season, every rising of the sun was part of this great balance. But always, beyond the edge of the known, there lurked Isfet, disorder, chaos, the shadow that threatened to consume all. And so, their mythology was not only a tale of creation, but a constant struggle to preserve life against the forces of destruction. At the heart of their stories was the river Nile, the giver of life. Each year it rose, flooding the land, leaving behind black soil rich with promise. To the Egyptians, this miracle was divine. They saw in the river the breath of their gods, a reminder that creation itself was born out of the waters. And so their myths began, not in the heavens, not in fire, but in water, endless, eternal, the ocean of chaos called Nun. From this ocean rose the first mound of earth, a single hill standing above the flood, and upon that mound, the first god, Atum, brought himself into being. Alone, he gave rise to air and to moisture, Shu and Tefnut, who in turn brought forth earth and sky, Geb and Nut. From them would come the great family of gods, the Ennead of Heliopolis, each embodying a force of the world, each shaping the destiny of humankind. But these are not only the stories of gods, they are also the stories of life and death, of kings and peasants, of the fragile journey of the soul. For in Egypt, death was not an ending, but a passage. The heart of every man and woman would one day be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, judged before Osiris, lord of the underworld. And if found pure, the soul would live forever among the blessed fields. So tonight, let us walk the sands of Egypt together. Let us stand before the temples where gods and men shared their prayers. Let us follow the sun's path as it sails across the sky by day and into the underworld by night. Let us listen to the voices of Isis and Osiris, of Horus and Seth, of Ra, and the many who guarded the balance of the world. For these are the myths that shaped a civilization of stone and starlight. These are the whispers carved on temple walls, painted in tombs, and carried on the desert winds. And as you listen, perhaps you will feel the same as the ancients did, that beyond the silence of the night there lies a story eternal, waiting to be told again. In the beginning, before the first dawn, there was nothing. No desert stretched to the horizon, no river flowed with silver light, no star glittered in the sky. There was no sky, no earth, no living creature to breathe the air. There was only none. The primordial waters, vast, eternal, and formless. None was not like the seas we know today, filled with waves and storms. It was a stillness deeper than silence, a darkness thicker than night. It stretched without end, heavy and endless, surrounding everything, for it was everything. And yet, within those waters lay the seed of all things, the potential for light, for form, for life itself. The Egyptians did not see none as empty. Rather, they believed it was full, overflowing with mystery, overflowing with the power of beginnings yet to be. It was the womb of existence, holding within it both the promise of creation and the threat of destruction. For just as life could emerge from none, so too could it one day return, swallowed back into the depths. Out of this eternal flood, there rose at last the first shape, the Benben, a single mound of earth. Imagine it, an island rising slowly above the surface of endless water, dark and gleaming under the first light of being. The priests of Heliopolis told that the Benben was sacred, for it was the place where creation began. Every temple built in Egypt would later echo this moment, its spires and pyramids rising like that first mound above the flood, a reminder of how the world itself emerged. Upon this mound appeared the first god, Adam, the self-created one. Alone in the silence, he brought himself into being. No father, no mother, no guiding hand, he simply was. Adam was both male and female, both everything and nothing, a unity of opposites in a single divine being. Standing upon the Benben, he looked out upon the endless none, and knew that he must bring order from the chaos. But how does one create a world when there is only solitude? Adam reached into his own essence and gave birth to his children. From his breath came Shu, the air, the dry wind that would fill the spaces between all things. From his body's moisture came Tefnut, the dew, the wetness that would give life to the earth. Together they were the first balance, dryness and wetness, the breath of wind and the touch of water. Yet when Shu and Tefnut wandered into the vast none, they became lost. Time passed, how long no one could say, for in those days time itself was not yet measured. Adam searched the horizon, but there was no horizon. He longed for his children, and sorrow filled him. From his eyes fell tears, heavy and glistening, and where they touched the mound, the first humans were formed. Thus mankind was born, not in triumph, but in grief, a creation born from divine longing and love. At last, Shu and Tefnut returned to Atum, and with them came the next generation. From their union came Geb, the earth, solid and green, and Nut, the sky, radiant and starry. They clung to one another with such passion that they could not be parted. The sky and the earth were one, pressed close in an eternal embrace. But Atum looked upon them and saw that there was no room for the world to grow, no space for rivers, no space for light, no space for living things. And so he commanded Shu, the air, to separate them. With gentle strength, Shu lifted Nut high above, her body arching over the world, her skin glittering with 1,000 stars. Below, Geb stretched wide, his laughter rumbling as mountains, his joy flowing as fertile valleys. Between them, Shu held his place, ever vigilant, keeping earth and sky apart so that creation could flourish. From Geb and Nut came the great children who would shape the destiny of gods and men. Osiris, lord of fertility, who would bring grain and harvest, and later reign as king of the dead. Isis, goddess of magic, wisdom, and motherhood, protector of kings and the living. Seth, god of storms, deserts, and chaos, forever embodying the shadow side of creation. And Nephthys, goddess of twilight, who walked between light and darkness. This family of gods formed the Ennead of Heliopolis, the 9 great deities who together reflected every aspect of existence. The Egyptians looked to them as both divine beings and cosmic principles, air and moisture, earth and sky, life and death, order and chaos. They were not distant figures but living truths, woven into the cycles of the world. Even so, the Egyptians never forgot Nun. The waters did not vanish with creation. They remained all around, waiting at the edges of the world, pressing always against the borders of existence. The people knew that if Ma'at, the balance of truth and order, ever failed, the world could sink once more into those waters, swallowed by chaos. Thus, every sunrise became sacred. Each morning, the sun rose from the horizon, as if once again emerging from none, reborn as the light of Ra. Each night, as the sun sank into the west, people wondered if it would return. And when it did, they knew creation still endured, upheld by the gods, preserved against the chaos that waited beyond. The temples of Egypt echoed this story in stone. Priests would say, each temple is the Benben, the sacred mound of creation. Each holy chamber is the first hill rising from none. And upon that sacred ground, the rituals of order were renewed, keeping the balance between Ma'at and Isfet, between harmony and chaos. The Nile, too, told this story. Each year it rose, flooding the land, just as none had once flooded the world. And when the waters receded, they left behind black, fertile soil, the gift of life itself. To the people, this was proof that creation was not a single event, but a cycle, death and rebirth, loss and renewal, the eternal rhythm of Nun and Benben. So the story of Egypt's beginning was not of sudden light, not of fiery birth, but of water and balance, of patience and order. Creation was an act of separation, of giving space for life to grow, of lifting the sky from the earth so that the world might breathe. And yet, even in that first dawn, the Egyptians felt the truth, that chaos was never truly gone. It lingered beyond the horizon, waiting in the waters, ready to rise again should the gods falter, should men forget Ma'at. Thus, from the very first moment of creation, their mythology was not only about how the world began, it was about how the world must be maintained every day, with every sunrise, every offering, every act of justice. For to the Egyptians, the battle between order and chaos was never over. It was the heartbeat of existence itself, when the world had taken its first breath, when the sky had been lifted from the earth and the mound of creation stood firm above the endless waters. The story of Egypt was still fragile, still unfolding. The gods were not yet many, but from their family came the shape of the universe itself. They were called the Ennead, the company of nine, the divine family who carried within them all the principles of existence. To speak of the Ennead was to speak of the cosmos, for each god was not only a person, not only a figure in myth, but also a force of nature, a truth of the world, a law by which all things lived and died. At the head of the Ennead stood Atum, the self-created, who had risen alone upon the Benben from the waters of Nun. From his essence came Shu, the breath of air, and Tefnut, the moisture of life. From them were born Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky, whose embrace had once been unbroken until Atum commanded them apart, so that life might grow in the space between. And from earth and sky came the four children, whose fates would bind the destiny of gods and men together: Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys. These nine together were the framework of creation, the living map of heaven and earth. Among them, Osiris shone brightest. He was the green god, lord of fertility and rebirth, who brought the blessings of agriculture and civilization. It was he who taught humanity to plant seed and harvest grain, who gave them laws to guide their lives, who reigned not with fire or thunder, but with harmony. His skin was painted green in sacred art, like the fields after the Nile's flood, like the promise of life renewed. To honor Osiris was to honor the rhythm of the seasons, the sowing and the reaping, the dying and the rising again. He was king among gods and also king of men, a bridge between mortality and eternity. Yet Osiris was not only life, he was also death, or rather the mystery beyond it. He became ruler of the underworld, judge of souls, guardian of the blessed fields where the righteous dead would dwell. In him, the Egyptians saw their greatest hope, that life does not end, but changes form, that what is cut down will rise again. At his side was Isis, his sister and beloved, a goddess whose power was unlike any other. She was magic itself, the hidden thread that bound the world together, the mistress of spells, the healer of wounds, the protector of children. She was the Great Mother, fierce in love and tireless in devotion. Later stories would tell how she wept and searched across the whole of Egypt for her slain husband, how she gathered his broken body and restored him through her magic, how her love defied even death. In this devotion, she became a model for all who mourned, a comfort for widows, a guide for mothers, a hope for the grieving. To the Egyptians, Isis was not only a goddess to worship, but a presence to trust, a name to whisper in moments of fear. Her amulets were carried by the living, her prayers sung by the dying. She was the embodiment of faithfulness, of wisdom, of the magic that binds creation itself. But every harmony carries within it a shadow, and the shadow of the Ennead was Seth. Born of earth and sky alongside Osiris and Isis, he was the god of storms, deserts, and violence. His nature was raw, untamed, unpredictable. Where Osiris brought fertile fields, Seth brought barren sands. Where Isis healed, Seth broke. He was the scorching wind that stripped the earth bare, the sudden storm that shattered crops, the barren desert that pressed against the green ribbon of the Nile. To some, he was a protector, for he stood against the serpent of chaos that threatened creation. But to most, he was chaos itself, the embodiment of Isfet, disorder, the eternal adversary of Ma'at. Yet the Egyptians knew that even Seth had a place in the balance of things. Without him, the world would stagnate, for it is often struggle that brings strength and conflict that shapes destiny. But too much of Seth, and all would collapse into ruin. He was both necessary and dangerous, a god both feared and needed, a figure of complexity and paradox. Beside him was his sister Nephthys, often overlooked, yet essential. She was the goddess of twilight, of the in-between, of moments neither here nor there. She was dusk and dawn, the breath between life and death, the whisper at the threshold of a tomb. She walked where boundaries blurred, where light faded into shadow. Though less famous than Isis, she held deep significance. At funerals, her hymns were sung, her presence invoked to comfort the grieving, her name called upon to guide the soul across the border. She was a guardian of the dead, but also a quiet strength for the living. If Isis was the embrace of life, Nephthys was the gentle hand that leads one into the night. Yet even beyond the Ennead, even beyond the Nine, there was a principle that held everything together, Ma'at. She was not merely a goddess, she was truth itself, order itself, the harmony by which the cosmos endured. Without her, Shu could not hold sky and earth apart, Osiris could not reign, Isis could not heal, Seth could not be contained. Without her, the world would sink again into none, swallowed by chaos. She was often pictured as a woman with a single feather upon her head, and it was this feather that weighed the hearts of men in the afterlife. Before Osiris, lord of the underworld, every soul was judged, their heart set upon the scales against the feather of Ma'at. If the heart was light, pure of lies and cruelty, the soul would pass into the fields of eternity. If it was heavy, burdened by sin, it would be devoured, erased forever. Thus, every action in life was measured against Ma'at. every truth spoken, every lie told, every kindness and every cruelty, all were part of the balance. To the Egyptians, Ma'at was not an abstract law. She was a living truth that touched every sunrise, every flood of the Nile, every act of justice in the courts, every word of prayer in the temples. She was the breath of the cosmos, the order that kept stars in the sky and rivers in their beds. Even the Pharaoh himself was bound to her. His sacred duty was not merely to rule men, but to uphold Ma'at, to guard the balance of the universe. In his judgments, in his rituals, in his governance of the land, he was seen as her earthly vessel. To fail in Ma'at was not only to fail as a king, but to endanger the world itself. And so, in the Ennead, we see more than a family. We see a living cosmos, air and moisture, earth and sky, love and betrayal, life and death, order and chaos, all were present in their stories. The Egyptians looked upon Osiris and saw the rhythm of their crops, upon Isis and saw the protection of their homes, upon Seth and saw the threat of the desert, upon Nephthys and saw the twilight of death, upon Ma'at and saw the eternal truth of balance. To honor these gods was to honor the very structure of the world. To pray to them was to keep creation alive. In the sacred city of Heliopolis, where these myths were told and retold, priests stood in temples designed to mirror the first mound. Their walls were painted with stars, their chambers aligned with the path of the sun. Every ritual they performed was not simply a prayer, but a renewal of creation itself. For the Egyptians did not believe creation was a single event long past. They believed it was ongoing, fragile, in need of constant renewal. Each morning, when the sun rose over the horizon, it was as if creation had begun again. Each night, when the sun descended into the underworld, the world held its breath, waiting to see if the cycle would continue. And each day, with every offering, every hymn, every act of justice, the people of Egypt helped to hold the balance, to keep Ma'at strong against the encroaching shadow of chaos. This is why the Ennead was remembered not only as myth, but as truth. Their stories were woven into the fields and the temples, into the Nile and the stars. They were living presences, guiding the people, protecting the dead, shaping the destiny of pharaohs. And yet, even within their harmony, there lay tension. For the bond between Osiris and Isis, the love and the renewal they brought, would be tested by the violence of Seth. The balance of Ma'at itself would tremble as brother turned against brother, as chaos struck at order. These struggles were not distant tales, but reflections of the world itself, where harmony is never perfect, where balance must always be guarded, where every life is lived upon the edge of Ma'at and Isfet. And so the story of the Ennead is not merely about gods. It is about the fragile balance of existence, about the way love and jealousy, life and death, order and chaos weave together to form the tapestry of the world. It is the heartbeat of Egyptian belief, echoing in stone temples, in desert winds, in prayers whispered beneath the eternal stars. It is a reminder that the cosmos is not secure, but must be renewed each day by gods and by men alike, through truth, through justice, through harmony. And it is this truth that would carry the people of Egypt through their lives, through their deaths, and into eternity. There was a time, in the earliest days, when the land of Egypt prospered under the gentle reign of Osiris. He was not only a god, but a king, and his kingdom was the whole of the world. The Nile rose faithfully beneath his blessing. Crops sprouted with abundance. The people learned the laws of community and the gifts of cultivation. Osiris was a ruler of harmony, a bringer of life, a guardian of truth. Where he walked, the land grew green. Where his voice carried, men listened with respect. But harmony, in this world, is never without envy. And the one who carried that envy was his own brother, Seth. To Seth belonged the desert, the burning sands, the storms that ravaged the land. He was wild where Osiris was ordered, barren where Osiris was fertile. In every place Osiris brought growth, Seth felt diminished. He looked upon his brother not with love, but with a bitterness that deepened with every harvest. The people sang Osiris's praises, while Seth's name was feared, whispered in caution. And so, within Seth, resentment became fire, and fire became a plan. Seth's heart knew only chaos, and chaos cannot abide peace. He devised a scheme, not sudden, not rash, but cunning and cruel. He built with his own hands a chest of wondrous beauty, made from cedar, inlaid with gold, polished until it gleamed like sunlight on water. Its proportions were exact, its form perfect, but not by chance. For Seth had measured it carefully to the size of Osiris himself, and only Osiris. It was a coffin, though no one yet called it such. When the chest was complete, Seth prepared a feast, a great gathering of gods and nobles. He filled his hall with food and drink, with laughter and music. The air itself seemed alive with celebration, and even Osiris, weary from the burdens of kingship, joined the merriment. Seth's smile was wide, his voice warm, his eyes bright as flame. But behind that brightness was a shadow that none could see. At the height of the feast, when wine had loosened tongues and music danced through the hall, Seth unveiled his gift. The chest was brought before the company, gleaming under the torchlight, a treasure fit for a king. Seth announced that whoever could fit within it perfectly would win it as their prize. One by one, the guests tried. Some were too tall, others too short, some too broad, others too slender. Laughter filled the air as each attempt failed. Then came Osiris. His heart was free of suspicion, for he loved his brother still, and saw only a game, only a jest among kin. He stepped forward, smiling, and lay himself within the chest, and as he did, he fit it perfectly, as Seth had known he would. In that moment, before Osiris could rise, Seth's laughter rang out, not with joy, but with triumph. He and his accomplices leapt forward, slamming shut the heavy lid. They nailed it fast, sealed it tight with molten lead. Osiris cried out, but his voice was muffled by wood and iron. The chest was lifted, carried swiftly through the hall, and with a final effort, hurled into the waters of the Nile. Silence fell upon the company. Some gods wept, others were stunned, but none dared oppose Seth's fury. The chest was carried away by the current, drifting into the darkness, while Osiris struggled within. And thus the green god, lord of life, was swallowed by the river, carried far from his kingdom, leaving Egypt in shadow. The land mourned. Without Osiris, the Nile faltered, the crops withered, the harmony of Mahat trembled. The people felt fear, for the world itself seemed wounded. Yet in that darkness, one heart refused despair, the heart of Isis. She was wife and sister to Osiris, and her love was not broken by death. Her sorrow was vast, but her resolve was greater. She clothed herself in mourning and set forth upon a journey across the lands and waters of Egypt, seeking the chest that held her beloved. Through villages and deserts she wandered, asking every creature, every river reed, every fisherman, had they seen a chest of gold and cedar borne upon the Nile's flow? The people pitied her, for she walked with tears upon her face, yet her voice was steady, her will unshaken. At last, after long wandering, she came to the shores of Byblos, far beyond Egypt's borders, where the chest had been cast ashore by the waves. It had lodged within the roots of a great tree, and as the tree grew, it embraced the chest, enfolding it within its trunk, as if hiding it from the world. The tree was so wondrous that the king of Byblos ordered it cut down and brought into his palace to serve as a pillar in his hall. Thus, the body of Osiris lay hidden within the house of kings, unknown to all. But Isis, guided by her magic and her love, found her way to Byblos. Disguised as a humble woman, she entered the court, offering her service as a nursemaid to the queen's child. Her wisdom and gentleness soon won the queen's heart, and in secret, Isis revealed her power, drawing fire around the child to burn away its mortality, whispering spells of immortality until she was discovered. Then she cast aside her disguise, and in her divine glory she begged for the pillar that held her husband. The king, awed and fearful, granted her request. Thus Isis received the chest, and with it, the broken body of Osiris. She carried it back to Egypt, weeping, her tears falling upon the desert like rain. In a hidden marsh, she opened the chest, and with magic and devotion, she embraced her husband, breathing life back into him for a single night. From their union was conceived Horus, the falcon-headed god, heir to Osiris's throne, destined to avenge his father and restore balance to Egypt. But Seth was not yet finished. He discovered the body of Osiris hidden in the marshes, and in his rage he tore it apart, scattering the pieces across the land, so that no god or mortal might find him whole again. It was an act not only of murder, but of desecration, a breaking of harmony, a direct assault upon Maat itself. Yet Isis was tireless. With her sister Nephthys beside her, she searched the whole of Egypt, gathering each fragment, each piece of her beloved. They traveled the length of the Nile, from delta to cataract, from desert to fertile field, collecting the remains of Osiris. Each place where a fragment was found became sacred, marked forever as a holy site, honored with temples and prayers. Piece by piece, Isis reassembled her husband, wrapping him in linen, binding him with spells, breathing into him the magic of resurrection. And though Osiris would never again walk among the living, he rose in another realm. He became the lord of the underworld, judge of the dead, ruler of the Duat. In his death, he gained a throne greater even than life, for he would forever guard the souls of men, granting them eternity if they lived in truth. And so the tragedy of Osiris became the foundation of hope. For though Seth had slain him, Osiris lived on in the realm beyond, and through him, every mortal gained the promise of rebirth. Through Isis's love and magic, life triumphed over death, not in the body, but in the spirit. And through their son Horus, a new chapter began, a chapter of vengeance, of struggle, of kingship reborn. For Horus, born in secret among the marshes, carried within him the legacy of his father and the strength of his mother. He would grow to challenge Seth, to battle for the throne of Egypt, to prove that Maat could endure even the deepest wound. But for now, he was a child, cradled in the arms of Isis, hidden from the eyes of chaos, his destiny waiting beneath the stars. Thus, the myth of Osiris and Isis was told and retold across the centuries. It was carved into temple walls, sung in funeral hymns, whispered in prayers of widows and kings alike. It taught the people that love is stronger than death, that justice may falter but never be extinguished, that from sorrow can come new life. It was not only the story of gods, but the story of the human heart, of grief and hope, of loss and renewal. In Osiris, they saw their fate. In Isis, their faith. In Horus, their future. And in the shadow of Seth, they saw the truth that chaos is never gone, but always waiting, always pressing against the balance of Ma'at. And so this chapter of Egyptian myth ends not with finality, but with a promise. For though Osiris lies in the underworld, though Isis weeps and searches, though Seth plots and rages, the child Horus has been born, and in his small hands lies the destiny of gods and men, the hope of Egypt, the eternal struggle of order against chaos, light against shadow, Ma'at against Isfet. The marshes of Egypt cradled the child Horus in secrecy. His mother, Isis, hid him among the reeds, protecting him from the gaze of Seth. There, beneath the whispering rushes, the falcon god grew in silence. Each day, Isis nursed him, weaving spells of protection, calling upon Ra, upon Thoth, upon all the powers of heaven to guard her son. She spoke charms against scorpions, against serpents, against every venomous thing that might creep upon the boy. And when fever struck him, when his small body trembled under the weight of poison, Isis wept and pleaded with the gods until Thoth himself descended, bringing the healing words that restored Horus to life. Thus the child survived, not by strength, but by love, by magic, by the ceaseless devotion of his mother. In the hidden places of the delta, Horus grew. His eyes were sharp as the sun, his spirit restless as the wind. He was the falcon upon the sky, the heir of Osiris, and though young, he carried within him the memory of his father's death, the sorrow of his mother's tears, and the promise of justice. As he grew to manhood, he rose from the marshes and declared before the company of gods, "I am Horus, son of Osiris, rightful king of Egypt. I claim the throne from which Seth has cast my father down." The gods gathered in council, for such a claim was no small matter. They assembled in the halls of Ra, upon the sacred waters where heaven met earth. The Ennead stood present, Shu and Tefnut, Geb and Nut, Osiris now in the underworld, Isis with her tears, Nephthys with her sorrow, and before them all, Horus and Seth. The council was presided over by Ra, the great sun god, whose voice was as radiant as his light, and by Thoth, the ibis-headed lord of wisdom, who recorded every word, weighing truth against falsehood. Seth spoke first, his voice like a desert storm, harsh and unrelenting. "I am the elder," he declared. "I am strong, I am fierce. The throne of Egypt is mine, for it is strength that rules, not weakness. What can this child do against me? He is untested, fragile, born in hiding. Let him remain with his mother. Let me reign, as I have reigned since Osiris was cast down." But Isis rose, her eyes burning with devotion. "He is no child," she said, her voice trembling yet powerful. "He is the son of Osiris, rightful heir to the throne. It is not chaos that should rule Egypt, but order, not envy, but justice. He shall sit upon the throne, for in him lives the spirit of renewal, the harmony of Ma'at." The gods murmured, divided. Some saw in Seth the power of defense, the storm that could protect Egypt from her enemies. Others saw in Horus the rightful heir, the promise of continuity, the balance of order. Ra himself hesitated, for Seth had once defended his solar bark against the serpent Apophis, and his strength was not without merit. Thus began not one battle, but many, a contest not only of swords, but of words, of trials, of cunning, stretching across years, even centuries, in the telling. The first trial was a contest of might. Horus and Seth met upon the waters, transformed into mighty hippopotamuses, creatures of strength and rage. They grappled beneath the waves, churning the river into foam, each striving to drown the other. For days they fought, their roars echoing across the Nile, until the gods themselves grew weary of the struggle. Isis, fearing for her son, fashioned a harpoon and cast it into the water. It struck Seth, wounding him, and he cried out in fury. But when she raised her weapon again and saw her son struggling nearby, her heart faltered. She could not strike, not knowing whom her weapon might harm. In her hesitation, Seth broke free, his wrath unbound. Later, in another contest, Horus and Seth faced one another in the form of men. They grappled upon the desert sands, their bodies straining with godlike strength. Seth struck Horus down, blinding him, tearing out his left eye in his rage. But Thoth, master of wisdom, restored it, fashioning for Horus the eye of the moon, the sacred Wadjet, more powerful and healing than it had ever been before. This eye became not only a symbol of Horus's resilience, but a talisman for all of Egypt, an emblem of protection, wholeness, and divine sight. The battles did not end there. Some stories tell of a race upon the river, where Horus and Seth sailed in boats of stone. Seth's vessel sank beneath the waves, heavy with pride, while Horus, cunning, fashioned his boat of wood painted to appear as stone, and so he prevailed. Other tales speak of trickery, of feasts where Seth sought to humiliate his nephew, of temptations and deceit. Again and again, the conflict shifted, sometimes fought with fists and spears, sometimes with words, sometimes with spells, always with the eyes of the gods upon them. The council of the gods grew weary, their patience worn thin by the endless quarrel. At times they favored Seth, at times Horus. Isis herself, once disguised as a beautiful maiden, entrapped Seth with her cunning words, persuading him to confess his unworthiness. But when Seth realized he had been tricked, his fury turned upon her, and he swore vengeance even against his own sister. At last, the council turned to Neith, the ancient goddess of wisdom, weaver of the cosmos. Her judgment was clear. The throne belongs to Horus, son of Osiris. He is the rightful heir. To deny him is to deny Ma'at itself. Still, Seth resisted, his pride unyielding, his rage unbroken. But the gods could wait no longer. Ra declared the council's decision. Horus would be king. Seth would be honored still, given dominion over the deserts and storms. But Egypt would belong to Horus, as it was meant to from the beginning. When the verdict was spoken, Isis wept, for her long struggle had borne fruit. Nephthys too rejoiced, for the balance of Ma'at had been restored. Horus ascended the throne of his father. The double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt placed upon his brow. He became the living king, the falcon upon the sky, the ruler of the two lands. And Osiris, though dwelling in the underworld, reigned as king of the dead, so that father and son together ruled heaven and earth, life and death, in harmony. Seth did not vanish. He remained a god of storms, a force of chaos, a necessary shadow upon the world. For the Egyptians knew that chaos could never be destroyed, only balanced, only contained. But his claim upon Egypt was ended, his envy broken, his fury diminished. And Horus, from that day forth, became the model for every pharaoh who would follow. Each king of Egypt was seen as the embodiment of Horus, the heir of Osiris, the guardian of Ma'at. Their battles upon earth echoed the cosmic struggle of order against chaos, justice against tyranny, light against shadow. Thus, the conflict of Horus and Seth was not only the story of two gods, but the story of Egypt itself. It was told in temples, carved into stone, painted upon papyri, sung in hymns and whispered in prayers. It reminded the people that justice may be delayed but will not be denied, that truth may falter but will not fall, that balance may tremble but will endure. It was the myth that gave meaning to kingship, that bound the pharaoh to the cosmos, that promised the people that Maat would hold firm against the winds of Isfet. And so ends the great quarrel, the battle of Horus and Seth, not with the annihilation of one by the other, but with balance restored, with truth upheld, with harmony renewed. For in the Egyptian heart, it was never destruction that brought order, but reconciliation. The weaving together of light and shadow, strength and wisdom, chaos and law. It was the eternal truth of Ma'at that even in conflict, the world may find its balance. When the sun sank each evening beyond the horizon, the people of Egypt did not believe it vanished. They knew it was embarking on a journey, a voyage through the shadowed realm of Duat, the underworld. To them, night was not the absence of the sun, but its passage through darkness, its perilous struggle against chaos, until it rose again with dawn. And as the sun god Ra journeyed through Duat each night, so too did every human soul, when the breath of life departed from its body. Death, for the Egyptians, was never an end, but a passage, a crossing into the mysteries beyond. Life was fragile, yet eternity stretched beyond it. To prepare for that eternity was the great task of every man and woman. They built tombs not merely as houses for the dead, but as gateways to the afterlife. They wrapped their bodies in linen, preserved with resin and salt, for the flesh itself was thought to be necessary, a vessel for the soul. And upon the walls of tombs, upon the papyrus scrolls placed in their coffins, were written spells and prayers. The great Book of the Dead, though the Egyptians themselves called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day. These words were not stories, but tools, maps to guide the soul through Duat, weapons against its dangers, charms to open its gates. The journey began at the threshold of death. The soul, now a Ba, winged and free, lifted from the silent body. It was guided by the Ka, the life force that lingered near, still hungry, still needing sustenance from the offerings of the living. Together they moved into the darkness, where the gates of Duat loomed tall. These gates were guarded by fearsome beings, part human, part beast, their names as strange as their forms. To pass, the soul needed to know their names, to speak them aloud, for in Egypt, knowledge itself was power. With each name spoken, each gate opened, and the soul moved deeper into the shadows. Duat was not a place of simple peace. It was a realm of trials, of tests, of dangers that mirrored the struggles of life. Rivers of fire cut across the land, lakes boiled with serpents, caverns echoed with voices of the damned. There were monsters with knives for teeth, demons with crocodile heads, serpents coiled in endless loops. The soul had to face them all, armed only with spells, with truth, with the strength of its heart. Yet this realm was not only horror, it was also beauty. Fields stretched golden under starlit skies, boats floated upon calm waters, blessed spirits walked in radiant light. For Duat was not hell, it was the mirror of existence, containing both terror and wonder, both punishment and reward. At the center of this realm stood Osiris, the green-skinned god, ruler of the dead, enthroned upon his dais. Around him were the gods of judgment, Anubis, jackal-headed guardian of tombs, who led the dead to their fate. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe, who recorded every verdict with impartial clarity. And the 42 assessors, divine beings who judged the soul's truth. Before Osiris lay the great scales of Maat, where judgment would be made. Here the most solemn of all trials awaited, the weighing of the heart. The heart, for the Egyptians, was the seat of the soul, of memory, of conscience. It was weighed against the feather of Maat, symbol of truth, order, and cosmic balance. If the heart was pure, unburdened by lies and cruelty, it would balance, and the soul would be declared justified. If it was heavy, weighed down with falsehood, injustice, or selfishness, then the balance would fail. And waiting beside the scales was Ammit, the devourer, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus. To the guilty, she was annihilation. The heavy-hearted soul would be cast into her jaws, devoured, erased forever, denied both life and death, lost to nothingness. But to the righteous, the journey did not end there. To them was granted passage into the field of reeds, a paradise where the blessed dwelled. It was Egypt perfected, its fields always fertile, its rivers always full, its skies always bright. There men tilled their fields not in hardship, but in joy, with no hunger, no thirst, no pain. Families were reunited, ancestors welcomed their children, and the soul lived in harmony forever. In the field of reeds, life continued as in Egypt, but without sorrow, without loss, without end. Yet the Egyptians believed that even in paradise, the dead remained connected to the living. Offerings of bread and beer, of meat and fruit, brought by family to the tomb, nourished the ka of the departed. The name of the dead, spoken aloud by the living, kept their spirit alive. To forget the dead was to let them fade, but to remember them was to grant them eternity. Thus, the tombs of Egypt were not only houses for the dead, but bridges between worlds, places where love and memory reached across the veil. Above all, the soul's journey mirrored the nightly voyage of Ra himself. Each evening, Ra descended into Duat in his solar bark, carrying the sun through darkness. His companions were gods and spirits, his enemies the monsters of chaos. Chief among them was Apophis, the great serpent of unending night, who sought to swallow the sun and end creation. Each night the serpent attacked, coiling around the bark, striking with jaws vast as mountains. Each night Ra fought with spears of fire, with spells of the gods, aided even by Seth, who, despite his chaos, stood as defender against the greater darkness. And each dawn, Ra triumphed, emerging in the east as the newborn sun, creation renewed once more. In this cosmic rhythm, the Egyptians found assurance. Just as Ra survived the night, so too would the righteous survive death. Just as the sun rose again, so too would they rise in the field of reeds. Every day, creation was reborn, and with it, the promise of eternity. The Duat, then, was not only a place of trial, but of transformation. It was a reminder that death was not the end, but a passage, a crossing, a test of truth. To live in accordance with Ma'at, to speak truth, to act with justice, was to prepare the heart for that weighing, to lighten it so that it might pass. To live falsely, to break Ma'at, was to doom oneself not only in life, but in eternity. Thus, the myths of Duat shaped Egyptian life. Every temple was aligned with the sun's path. Every festival marked the cycle of death and rebirth. Every judgment of Pharaoh echoed the weighing of the heart. They lived in awareness that eternity awaited them, that every word, every deed was written upon the heart to be weighed in Osiris's hall. And as the Nile flowed eternal, so too did their hope. For in the end, all souls sought the field of reeds where they might walk forever under a sky that never darkened, where they might sit in the shade of tamarisk trees, drink from clear waters, see again the faces of those they loved. And there, under the watch of Osiris, ruler of eternity, they would dwell in peace. To the Egyptians, this was not dream or myth. It was certainty. It was carved into the stone of their tombs, painted upon the walls of their temples, whispered in their prayers. For in their hearts, as in the heart of the cosmos, there was always the promise that order would prevail over chaos, that truth would triumph over falsehood, that life would endure beyond death. And so the journey through Duat was not a tale of terror, but of hope. It was the great assurance of Egypt that though the body may perish, the soul would rise, tested, purified, justified, and welcomed into eternity. The Nile would flow, the sun would rise, the fields would grow green, and the souls of the righteous would live forever, their names spoken, their hearts light, their eternity secure beneath the unchanging stars. In the vast tapestry of Egyptian myth, no god stood alone. Though Osiris ruled the underworld, though Isis embodied love and magic, though Horus wore the crown of kingship, their stories were entwined with many others, each a thread in the eternal weaving of Ma'at. To speak of Egypt was to speak of 1,000 divine names, each carrying power, each remembered in temples and prayers, each holding a secret of the cosmos. Among them was Thoth, the ibis-headed god, lord of wisdom and writing, keeper of the divine word. He was the scribe of the gods, standing at the side of Osiris during the weighing of the heart, recording with impartial hand every verdict, every truth. His was the gift of hieroglyphs, the sacred script carved into stone, painted upon papyrus, whispered in spells. To Thoth, words were not mere sounds, but living beings, vessels of magic, echoes of creation. It was said that when Ra spoke the world into being, it was Thoth who gave those words form, who wrote them upon the fabric of existence so that they might endure. In this, the Egyptians saw that memory and language were divine, that to write was to preserve, to resist the forgetting that was death's shadow. Thoth was not only a scribe, but a healer. When Horus's eye was torn away by Seth, it was Thoth who restored it, shaping it anew, making it more whole than before. And so the eye of Horus became not merely a scar but a symbol of healing, a charm carried by sailors, mothers, and kings alike. It was Thoth who taught men the measure of time, who divided the year into seasons, who kept the balance of the moon and stars. In his presence, knowledge itself became a god, a companion to the people, guiding them in their search for eternity. Beside Thoth walked Anubis, the jackal-headed lord of tombs, the silent guardian of the dead. Before Osiris claimed the throne of the underworld, it was Anubis who watched over the departed, wrapping their bodies in linen, guiding their souls through the shadows. He was the embalmer, the protector, the companion of the dead. Priests who tended the mummification wore his mask, believing that in their hands worked his power, that through their touch the dead were preserved, ready for judgment. To the Egyptians, Anubis was not terror, but comfort, the watchful eye that ensured the soul would not be lost. His black fur was the color of fertile earth, the soil renewed by the Nile's flood, a reminder that even in darkness there is rebirth. There was also Hathor, the golden goddess, cow-headed or radiant in woman's form, who embodied joy, music, love, and the sweetness of life. She was the lady of dance, the mistress of song, the one who greeted the dead with a cup of cool water, refreshing them as they entered eternity. To the living, she was the patron of beauty and affection. To the dead, she was solace. In festivals dedicated to her, music and laughter filled the air, for she reminded Egypt that life, though fleeting, was meant to be celebrated. Even in their sternest temples, her presence was gentle, a balance to the stern justice of other gods. And yet, within the same pantheon, there was Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess, fierce and blazing with the fire of the sun. She was wrath itself, the heat of the desert wind, the scourge of plague and battle. When Ra's eye grew angry at the rebellion of mankind, it was Sekhmet who descended, laying waste to fields and cities, her rage unquenchable. But when the gods feared she would destroy all creation, they tricked her with red-stained beer, making her drunk, turning her fury into laughter, her slaughter into dance. Thus she too bore two faces, one of terror, one of healing, reminding Egypt that the same force that destroys can also protect. Priests prayed to her for both vengeance and protection, for plague and for cure. In these gods, the Egyptians saw the reflection of life's many faces, wisdom and wrath, love and death, joy and sorrow. Their myths taught that no force was wholly good or wholly evil, but each was necessary, each part of the cosmic balance. To honor one god was to honor a fragment of the whole. To dishonor any was to risk tipping the scales of Ma'at. Yet there was a truth deeper still, a mystery whispered in hymns and carved in hidden texts, that the gods themselves endured only so long as their names were spoken, their stories remembered. To the Egyptians, memory was life, and forgetting was a second death. The name of a god carved upon a wall, sung in prayer, offered in sacrifice, sustained that god across the ages. And so too with mortals, their names chiseled into tombs, their deeds written in papyri, their prayers recited by children, kept their spirits alive. Oblivion came not with death, but with silence, with the loss of remembrance. This was why temples rose like mountains upon the Nile's banks, why priests recited hymns day after day, why scribes copied the same stories onto countless scrolls. Each act of remembrance was an offering, each word a spark of divinity renewed. To erase a name, to chisel it out from stone, was the most terrible of punishments, for it condemned not only the body but the soul, stripping it of eternity. But to speak a name aloud, to honor it in memory, was to grant immortality. In this, the Egyptians glimpsed a truth as profound as any myth, that eternity lies not only in the gods, but in memory itself. As long as a story is told, as long as a name is remembered, the soul endures. The gods, vast and eternal, mirrored this human longing, for they too were bound to memory, to the devotion of those who walked the earth. Thus, the pantheon of Egypt was not only a gallery of divine faces, but a mirror of the human heart. In Thoth, they saw their thirst for wisdom. In Anubis, their fear and comfort in death. In Hathor, their joy and tenderness. In Sekhmet, their rage and their healing. In Osiris and Isis, their grief and their love. In Horus and Seth, their struggle between justice and chaos. Each god was a piece of themselves, raised to eternity, preserved in story and stone. And through it all, the thread of memory bound them together. For in Egypt, to remember was to live, to speak was to create, to write was to endure. And so long as the Nile flowed, so long as the sun rose and fell, so long as names were spoken in temples and prayers, the gods would remain, and with them, the people who loved them. In the beginning, before the temples rose, before the pyramids pierced the sky, Before the very names of kings were etched into stone, there was the river, the Nile. It flowed quietly at first, unseen by humankind, coursing through the heart of the desert as though guided by eternity itself. And in time, the people of Egypt came to know it, not simply as water, but as breath, as memory, as the pulse of their world. The Egyptians did not think of the Nile as a thing, but as a being. They spoke of it as Hapi, god of abundance, neither holy man nor holy woman, but a fusion of both. For within the river lay the power to create, to nourish, to renew. Hapi's belly was round with fullness, their breasts heavy with sustenance, their arms bearing lotus and papyrus, the plants of Upper and Lower Egypt, symbols that the river bound all lands into one. Each year, like a great heartbeat, the river swelled and spilled over its banks. The inundation was no disaster. It was salvation. Where other lands feared flood, Egypt rejoiced. The waters came with gifts from distant lands, rich black silt carried from the faraway mountains, laid down upon the waiting earth. The land, parched and barren under the sun, became fertile once more, ready for planting, ready for life. The Egyptians sang hymns to this miracle. In their songs, the river was not a stream, but a god descending, pouring life into a waiting land. One hymn said, "Hail to you, O Nile, who rises from the earth, who comes to give life to Egypt. When you overflow, the land rejoices, every belly is glad. Every heart exults, every tooth laughs." To them, the river was not mere water. It was laughter. It was food. It was love. But the Nile was also mystery. Its source lay far beyond what the Egyptians knew, hidden in the lands of Nubia, veiled by cataracts and forests, by mountains and mist. They did not ask from where it came, for they believed it flowed from eternity, from none itself, the primordial waters of creation. To drink of the Nile was to drink from the first dawn, to touch the very breath of the gods. Upon its banks, the gods themselves were said to walk. Isis wept here when she searched for Osiris, her tears swelling the waters. Horus hunted upon its surface, his falcon shadow racing across the waves. Seth raged in its storms, his desert winds lashing against the boats. Ra's light fell upon it each morning, mirrored in rippling gold. And Osiris himself, the green-skinned lord of rebirth, was thought to dwell within the river's depths, his body broken and scattered, his spirit flowing eternally with the current. Thus, every cup of water was communion with the divine. The Nile was not only divine, it was daily. It was the path of trade, the road of boats. White sails swelled against desert winds as grain, stone, gold, and incense traveled along its length. Villages rose along its banks, children bathed in its shallows, women washed linen in its current. Priests purified themselves in its cool depths before entering temples. To live in Egypt was to live beside the Nile, to breathe in its rhythm, to let its pulse become one's own. And yet, the Nile was double-edged. Its abundance was also its danger. When the flood rose too high, villages were drowned. When it failed to rise, famine stalked the land. In this, the river mirrored the gods themselves, both kind and fierce, both gentle and wrathful, both life and death. The Egyptians prayed to Hapi not only for generosity but for balance, for Ma to hold steady, for the river to bless and not to destroy. The Nile was also time. The year itself was marked by its rhythms, 3 seasons, Akhet, the inundation, Pere, the growing, and Shemu, the harvest. Festivals crowned its cycle. Offerings were cast into the waters, bread, beer, flowers, even small statues, tokens to please the god, to ensure the return of abundance. Every new flood was creation renewed, the first dawn replayed, the promise of eternity kept. And as the river nourished the living, so too did it guide the dead. The Egyptians imagined the afterlife as a reflection of Egypt perfected, the field of reeds, where canals stretched wide, boats drifted among blossoms, and families lived together forever upon fertile banks. There, the souls of the righteous farmed not with hardship, but with joy, their fields watered eternally by channels that never ran dry. The Nile was the bridge between worlds, carrying the soul from life into eternity, from earth into the embrace of Osiris. So closely was the river bound to eternity that funerary rites themselves echoed its flow. Bodies were washed with water from the Nile before burial. Tomb walls showed boats sailing upon its waters, carrying the dead toward judgment. In the Book of the Dead, spells described crossing its channels, navigating its currents, drinking from its wells. To be denied water in the afterlife was torment. To drink from the Nile in Duat was salvation. Above all, the Nile was memory. Its waters bore not only fish and silt, but stories. Every temple carved along its banks told a tale, the rise of a king, the victory of a battle, the hymn of a god. Every name etched into stone became a ripple upon its surface. Every offering dropped into its depths carried a prayer to the gods, a plea for remembrance. Families whispered the names of their dead along the riverbank, letting the current carry those names into eternity. For the Egyptians believed that to be remembered was to live. To have one's name spoken was to endure. Just as the gods themselves lived so long as their names were honored, so too did mortals. The Nile, flowing without end, was the keeper of those names, the carrier of those stories. To walk beside it was to walk beside the memory of every king, every priest, every child who had ever gazed upon its waters. And so the Nile became Egypt's eternity. Dynasties rose and fell. Temples crumbled, cities turned to dust, yet the river flowed on, unchanged, unbroken, whispering still. Its current carried both the laughter of children and the hymns of priests, the cries of grief and the chants of festivals, the silence of the dead and the voices of the living. It bound them all together into one endless song. To the Egyptians, the Nile was not simply the past or the present. It was the bridge to forever. For as long as it flowed, Egypt would live. And even if the sands swallowed their monuments, even if their gods were forgotten by distant ages, the Nile would remember. It would flow beneath the stars, bearing with it the memory of a people who once carved eternity from stone, who once dreamed of the gods, who once listened to the whisper of the river and heard within it the voice of life itself. For the Nile was not only water, it was eternity. In the shimmering land of Egypt, where the river runs like a silver thread through endless desert, there arose a figure who was more than mortal, more than king. To his people, he was the very breath of the gods. They called him Pharaoh, the great house, the living Horus who soared upon falcon wings, the son of Ra who carried the sun's eternal light in his crown. To speak his name was to whisper eternity. To see his face was to glimpse the divine. In him, the people found both protector and priest, both ruler and servant, both the keeper of balance and the embodiment of memory. The Egyptians believed that the world itself was fragile, a scale always poised between harmony and chaos. On one side lay Ma'at, truth and justice, balance and order. On the other side lurked Isfet, disorder and destruction, waiting always to return. Pharaoh was the living fulcrum of this scale. It was not enough that he govern with wisdom or lead with strength. His very existence was bound to the rhythm of the cosmos. If he ruled with justice, then the Nile would rise in its appointed season, the fields would flourish, the stars would turn in their courses, and Egypt would endure. But if he faltered, if injustice took root or temples fell silent, then the balance would shift. The flood might fail, famine might stalk the land, and even the journey of the sun across the sky could falter. Thus, the double crown upon his head was not merely a symbol of rule, but the weight of the universe itself, resting on human shoulders. Each dawn, as the first light touched the horizon, Pharaoh's presence filled the temples of the gods. The priests carried out the daily rituals, washing the statues, clothing them in linen, anointing them with oils, offering bread and beer, incense and flowers. Yet these were not acts of their own, but the acts of Pharaoh through their hands. He was the high priest of every shrine in the land, the one through whom the gods were honored and sustained. Without him, the link between heaven and earth would weaken, and the divine might turn away. With him, the gods smiled upon Egypt. The river rose, the fields grew green, and life endured. The symbols of his kingship spoke silently of his role. In one hand, he carried the crook, sign of the shepherd guiding his flock, and in the other, the flail, sign of authority, ready to chastise. Upon his brow coiled the uraeus, the rearing cobra, Wadjet's fiery eye, ready to strike down his enemies with the breath of flame. His crowns were many, each a story in itself. The tall white crown of Upper Egypt, the flat red crown of Lower Egypt, and when joined together, the double crown that proclaimed his rule over the two lands united forever. His very name, carved into stone and painted on temple walls, was more than memory. It was magic. To speak it aloud was to keep him alive. To erase it was to kill him a second time. Through the centuries, pharaohs rose and fell, each unique, each eternal. Djoser raised the step pyramid at Saqqara, a stairway for the soul to climb into the heavens. Khufu commanded the building of the Great Pyramid, a mountain of stone that still touches the sky after 4,000 years, whispering his name into eternity. Hatshepsut, the woman who wore the double crown, ruled as pharaoh in her own right, carving her image into stone and sending ships to Punt to bring back incense and gold. Akhenaten turned his face to the Aten, the sun disk, proclaiming a vision of one god, reshaping temples and hymns in his radiant city, though his dream faded when his breath ceased. Tutankhamun, his child successor, restored the old ways, and though he reigned but a short while, his tomb remained sealed in silence, waiting for the day when the modern world would lift the lid and hear his whisper again. And Ramses the Great, mighty in battle, builder of temples, inscribed his name so deeply into the cliffs of Abu Simbel that time itself has not been able to erase it. Each of these rulers lived differently, some with peace, some with war, some with stone, some with prayer, but all wore the mantle of Horus, all upheld Ma'at, all carried the crook and flail. In their lifetimes, they were falcons soaring across the sky. In their deaths, they became Osiris, lord of the underworld, dwelling in the fields of eternity. For when Pharaoh's breath ended, he did not fall into silence. His body was entombed in pyramids of stone or valleys cut into the rock, but his spirit endured. His tomb was not a grave, but a gateway, filled with treasures and spells to guide him through the Duat. Within, priests placed food and drink, statues of servants, boats for sailing into the afterlife, and inscribed upon the walls the sacred words of the Book of the Dead, so that Pharaoh might be reborn in the field of reeds, where canals shimmer and harvests never fail. And as Pharaoh entered the underworld, his son rose in his place. The eternal cycle continued. The dead king became Osiris, lord of the dead, while the living heir became Horus, falcon reborn. Kingship was not a possession but a flame, passed from hand to hand, never extinguished, burning across generations. In this way, Pharaoh was never truly gone. He lived in the Nile's rhythm, in the rising of the sun, in the prayers of his people, in the monuments of stone that reached for the stars. For the people of Egypt, Pharaoh was memory made flesh. To speak his name was to preserve life. To carve his likeness in stone was to bind him to eternity. Every obelisk, every statue, every inscription was a shield against forgetting, for they feared the second death, not of the body, but of the name, the moment when no voice remembered who they had been. Pharaoh understood this fear, for he too was human beneath the crown, and so he built in stone, carved in granite, inscribed in gold, not only to declare his power, but to beg remembrance. Yet Pharaoh was not only king of Egypt. To distant lands he was the son of Ra, a god upon earth. Ambassadors from Nubia, from Libya, from Syria and beyond came bearing tribute, bowing low before him as if before the sun itself. His armies marched not only with weapons, but with the will of the gods, their victories carved into temple walls as eternal reenactments of Horus striking down Seth, of order triumphing over chaos. And yet, beneath the grandeur and gold, Pharaoh was still mortal. He too felt the weight of years, the ache of age, the breath growing thin. He too feared the silence of death. He too longed to endure. And in this, he was not unlike his people. They too prayed to be remembered. They too dreamed of the field of reeds. They too placed their hope in the balance of Ma'at, in the mercy of Osiris, in the rising of Ra. But Pharaoh's gift was that he became the mirror in which his people saw themselves reflected. He was divine, yet human, eternal, yet mortal, ruler of all, yet bound by the same fear of forgetting. In him, they saw their own dreams magnified. Through him, they touched the divine. He was not simply a man upon a throne, but the living thread between heaven and earth, the bridge of memory, the guardian of balance, the voice of the gods, the breath of Egypt itself. And so long as the Nile flows, so long as the sun rises, so long as the stars wheel above the desert, Pharaoh endures. His crown is more than gold. It is the light of Ra. It is the wings of Horus. It is the breath of Ma'at. And it is eternal in the stillness of the Egyptian night, when the desert wind drifted soft as a whisper and the stars burned with cold fire above. The people of the Nile looked upon the heavens and wondered about time. To them, time was not a straight line, beginning once and ending once. It was a circle, a wheel, a weaving that turned endlessly, carrying all things back into itself. The sun that rose each morning would fall each evening, only to return again. The river that flooded each year would withdraw, only to return again. The pharaoh who ruled as Horus, soaring falcon of the sky, would die and descend as Osiris, only to return in his heir, Horus renewed. Life and death, light and shadow, memory and dream, all were woven into this circle. The Egyptians gave names to these kinds of time. One was Nehe, the time of the sun and the river, the cycles that renewed, the days and the seasons, the repeating of the eternal rhythm. The other was Jet, the time of eternity, the unchanging stillness that held the universe in place. Together, Nehe and Jet were the two faces of eternity, the two threads of the loom upon which creation was woven. Pharaoh lived in both. In Nehe he upheld the daily rituals, the rising of Ra, the turning of the stars, the flooding of the Nile, In Jet he sought to endure forever, his name carved in stone, his tomb built in silence, his memory kept alive in the prayers of his people. Memory itself was a kind of eternity, for to be remembered was to live again. The Egyptians feared not death of the body, for they believed the soul traveled on, guided by spells and prayers, judged in the hall of Osiris. What they feared most was the death of memory, the death of the name. To be forgotten was to vanish utterly, to lose both Nehe and Jet, to sink into a silence beyond even the duat. And so they carved names into stone, painted them on walls, wrote them in papyrus scrolls. Pharaohs built monuments of such size and endurance that their names would echo through millennia, carried by stone long after flesh was gone. Even the poorest farmer longed for a small tomb, a simple stela, so that his children and grandchildren might whisper his name and preserve him in the great weaving of time. And yet, memory was not only carved in stone. It lived in voices, in stories spoken at dusk, in songs sung by boatmen as they drifted along the Nile. A grandmother telling her grandchildren the deeds of their ancestors was as powerful, in its own way, as the hieroglyphs upon the walls of Karnak. In each retelling, a life was renewed, a name kept alive, a thread added to the great tapestry. The pharaoh might command pyramids of stone, but even the humblest family, gathered in the glow of a small oil lamp, played their part in the weaving of eternity. Dreams, too, were part of this weaving, for in sleep, the Egyptians believed, the soul wandered free, leaving the body and drifting into realms unseen. In dreams, one might meet the dead, might walk beside ancestors long vanished, might hear the voice of the gods. Temples were built where dreamers could sleep in sacred silence, waiting for visions, for oracles, for guidance whispered in the night. The temple of Serapis in later times became a place where the sick came to dream of healing, but long before that, Egyptians laid their heads upon cool stone, hoping for visions of Hathor, of Isis, of Osiris. To dream was to step beyond Nehe, the daily turning, into the space between, where Jet, the eternal, touched the soul. And there were dreams that changed destinies. One tale tells of Thutmose, a young prince, who slept at the feet of the great Sphinx. In his dream, the Sphinx spoke, promising him the throne if he would clear the sand that covered its body. Thutmose awoke, believed, and fulfilled the dream. And in time, he became Pharaoh, remembered as Thutmose IV, his dream carved forever upon the Sphinx's stela. So too did dreams whisper to common folk. A vision of a field heavy with grain might be a promise of harvest. A dream of a river rising high might be a warning of flood. Dreams were never dismissed. They were another language of the gods, another thread in the weaving of time. Imagine, too, the farmers at their work, turning soil beneath the sun, whispering songs that carried the names of their forebears. In their hearts, they believed that to speak the names of the dead was to nourish the souls of the departed. In this way, the fields themselves became places of remembrance. Each furrow turned, each seed planted, was an offering, a ritual, a small act in the great weaving of memory. The soldier marching under Pharaoh's banner carried not only his spear, but also the memory of his ancestors, etched into the prayers he muttered before battle. The scribe bending over papyrus carried not only words, but lives, preserving them in lines of ink that might outlast stone. Time itself was a weaving of these threads, memory etched in stone, dream drifting through night, ritual repeated each dawn. Labor carried out beneath the sun, all bound together by Pharaoh's presence. He was the axis of the loom, the spindle upon which time turned. Through him, The cycle of Nehe was kept in balance, the hope of Jet preserved. Without him, memory might fade, dreams might falter, chaos might return. With him, the weaving continued, unbroken across centuries. And as each pharaoh died, he entered the tapestry, becoming a thread within eternity. Osiris awaited him, lord of the underworld, ruler of the field of reeds. There, amid shining waters and endless harvest, Pharaoh walked once more, no longer burdened by crown or crook, but free in eternal balance. His name lived on in stone, his image in temples, his spirit in stars. His people whispered his memory, and in whispering, they kept him alive. The Egyptians did not fear death as an end, but as a passage. They feared only to be forgotten. And so, life itself became preparation for memory. Families saved to build tombs, no matter how humble, so that their names might endure. Priests recorded hymns and prayers so that voices would rise long after the singers were gone. Pharaoh raised monuments that touched the sky so that eternity itself would bow before his name. All this was the weaving of time, the endless effort to resist the silence of oblivion, to transform fleeting breath into everlasting word. Dynasties rose and fell, yet all were threads in the tapestry. The old kingdom kings, who built pyramids like mountains, were one pattern. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs, who restored order after chaos, another. The New Kingdom rulers, who stretched Egypt's power across lands far away, another still. Each age was a color, each reign a motif, each pharaoh a golden thread, and when looked upon as a whole, the tapestry glowed, vast and eternal, shimmering with memory, humming with dreams. And in this weaving, all were united. The farmer in the field, the scribe at his scroll, the soldier on the march, the priest in the temple, the pharaoh on his throne. Each sought to be remembered, each longed for eternity. Memory was the thread that made them equal. Dream the fabric in which they all shared. And as they gazed upon the monuments of their kings, as they whispered the names of ancestors, as they closed their eyes in sleep and wandered among the gods, they felt themselves part of something greater than life, something deeper than death, something woven into the very fabric of the cosmos. And so Egypt endured, not merely in stone, not merely in sand, but in memory and in dream. The weaving of time was unbroken. The Nile still flowed, the sun still rose, the stars still turned, and in the silence of the desert night, the people knew that they too were eternal, for they were part of the tapestry, bound forever in the threads of memory, dream, and immortality. The desert lies silent beneath the eternal sky. The wind whispers across the dunes, soft as the breath of eternity, carrying grains of sand from one place to another, as it has done for thousands of years. The Nile flows on, dark and shining under the stars, its waters moving from the south to the north, from past to future, from birth to death, to birth again. Above, the constellations trace their endless paths, the same patterns the ancient Egyptians saw, the same stars under which they dreamed, the same heavens in which they placed their gods. Here, time does not end. It circles, returning to itself, weaving all things back into being. The Egyptians called it the eternal return. Not a simple repetition, but a rhythm, a pulse, a truth that bound the cosmos. The sun that sets will rise. The flood that recedes will return. The Pharaoh who dies will live again in his son and in the hearts of his people. Nothing is lost. Everything is transformed. Everything returns. In this eternal return, life finds meaning. For the Egyptians, To live was not to rush toward an end, but to walk a circle, to tread a path that would come again, to leave behind a mark that would echo when the circle turned. Memory was a torch passed from hand to hand. Dream was a bridge that led forward and back. Each person, no matter how great or humble, was a traveler in the same circle. And so they walked without fear, for the return promised continuity, promised renewal, promised that nothing truly ended. The Pharaoh, as the living Horus, embodied this truth most fully. In him, the eternal return was not a belief, but a living presence. He rose with the sun, renewed each day. He died, and yet he lived again as Osiris, ruler of the underworld. And in his heir, Horus reborn, he rose once more. Thus kingship itself was eternal, flowing not in a straight line, but in a circle, in an unbroken return. Each coronation was a renewal of creation. Each death was a passage into eternity. Each name carved into stone was another thread in the circle of memory. And yet, the eternal return was not only for pharaohs. It was for all. The farmer whose fields were flooded each year saw in the Nile the same promise. Destruction was not the end, but the beginning of abundance. The mother who bore a child saw in the infant's eyes the return of ancestors. The scribe who copied the wisdom of old texts into new papyrus saw himself not as creating, but as renewing, carrying the past into the present, ensuring it would flow again into the future. Even the land itself was an image of the return. Each morning, the eastern horizon blazed with the birth of Ra, who sailed his solar bark across the heavens. Each evening, the western sky glowed with his descent, his passage into the Duat. Through the night, he fought chaos, and each dawn he returned, victorious, renewed. This was not only the journey of the sun, but the journey of every soul. To live, to die, to pass through darkness, and to rise again in light. This was the pattern, eternal, unbreakable. And the Egyptians celebrated this return in ritual. One of the oldest was the Hebsed festival, held after 30 years of a pharaoh's reign. In this rite, the king renewed his power, running a sacred course, proving his strength, demonstrating his vitality before the gods and the people. It was not mere pageantry. It was a reenactment of the eternal return, a statement that Pharaoh's reign was reborn, that order endured, that the cycle continued. With music, dance, offerings, and prayers, the people joined in this renewal, feeling themselves woven into the circle. At dawn, in temples across Egypt, priests greeted the sun with hymns, lifting their voices as the first rays touched the horizon. They believed their songs did not simply honor Ra, but aided his return, strengthened his bark as it sailed from night into day. Each hymn was a thread, each offering a stitch, each ritual a pattern in the great tapestry of eternity. The return was not automatic. It was sustained by devotion, by remembrance, by the daily weaving of human hands and voices into the fabric of cosmic time. And in the silence of their tombs, the dead lay waiting not for an ending, but for renewal. Coffins were inscribed with spells to guide the soul through night into dawn. Walls were painted with harvests, feasts, and families, so that these joys would return in the field of reeds. Mummies were wrapped with care, not to preserve a past life, but to prepare for a future one. Death was not final. It was but a setting sun, certain to rise again. So too the civilization itself endured. Dynasties fell, invasions came, sand-covered temples, yet Egypt returned again and again in memory, in dream, in stone. Even now, long after the last pharaoh, we speak their names, We gaze upon their monuments, we wonder at their myths. In remembering them, we take part in the same circle. They live again in our memory. Their stories return in our dreams. Egypt itself has become eternal through the weaving of time, through the eternal return. Consider the stars above Egypt's sky, Orion rising, Osiris reborn, Sirius shining, Isis renewed. Each year, the rising of Sirius heralded the flooding of the Nile, a return that sustained life. The stars themselves were woven into this rhythm, a celestial calendar of return. To look upon the night sky was to see eternity unfolding, the same patterns turning forever. Thus, the story of Egyptian mythology is not one of endings, but of circles. Gods rise and fall, but they return. Pharaohs live and die, but they endure. The Nile floods and withdraws, but it flows forever. The sun sets, but it always rises. Memory fades in one place, but is renewed in another. Dreams vanish upon waking, yet they return the next night. All is return. All is eternity. And so, as you listen in the quiet of the night, as your breath slows and your eyes grow heavy, imagine yourself upon the banks of the Nile. The stars shine above you. The river whispers beside you. The desert stretches infinite around you. You are part of the weaving, part of the circle, part of the eternal return. Your life is a thread, shining and fragile, yet eternal in its weaving with all others. Your dreams are doors, opening into timelessness. Your memory is light, enduring beyond darkness. And when you close your eyes, you too join the great circle, returning, renewing, eternal. The Nile still flows. The sun still rises. The stars still turn. Egypt endures, and you endure with it, forever part of the eternal return. The story now grows quiet. The voices of gods and kings fade into the distance, like echoes carried away by the desert wind. The river flows on, slow and steady, its surface gleaming beneath the silver light of the moon. The stars drift overhead, ancient and eternal, the same stars the pharaohs once gazed upon, the same stars beneath which the people of the Nile whispered their prayers. You are still here, listening, breathing, and in your breath is the rhythm of the Nile. In your heartbeat is the drum of eternity. In the heaviness of your eyelids is the promise of rest, of return, of renewal. Close your eyes and feel the desert night around you. The sand is cool beneath your feet, the air dry and soft against your skin. Far away, a jackal cries, a sound that rises and then fades, swallowed by the vastness of silence. Above, Orion walks across the sky, Osiris reborn, shining forever. Near him, Sirius burns bright, Isis faithful and luminous. Together they remind you of the eternal return, the promise that life is never lost, only transformed. The river whispers softly, telling you stories as it flows. It tells you of the dawns that have come and gone, of countless mornings when the sun rose golden over the horizon, of countless evenings when it sank crimson into the west. It tells you of fishermen casting their nets, of farmers bending to plant grain, of children laughing on its banks. It tells you of pharaohs whose reflections once shone upon its waters, and of nameless wanderers who drank from its flow. All are gone, and yet all remain. The Nile remembers. The Nile endures. You are part of this remembering. In closing your eyes tonight, you too are woven into the tapestry. Your dreams will flow into the current. Your breath will join the rhythm. Your silence will become part of the great hush of the desert. Nothing is lost. Nothing ever ends. Everything returns. Feel yourself sinking now, gently, like the sun dipping into the horizon. There is no fear in this descent, only peace. The sun does not die when it sets. It journeys through the night, only to rise again. So too do you sink into darkness, only to rise again renewed at dawn. The desert cradles you. The sand stretches in all directions, endless, timeless, soft as a sea turned to gold. Above, the stars shimmer, weaving their eternal patterns. One by one, they call you into stillness, into calm. You are safe here, beneath their watchful gaze, safe in the arms of eternity. Listen to the rhythm of your breath. Inhale, and you draw the river within you. Exhale, and you release it back into the world. Each breath is a tide, flowing, returning, eternal. Your body grows heavy, your thoughts dissolve, your spirit drifts free. And in this drifting, you enter the circle. You walk where the ancients walked. You dream as they dreamed. You become part of their eternal return. Imagine now that you stand at the edge of the Nile at dawn. The horizon glows faintly, touched with the first light of Ra. The river is quiet, holding its breath. Then, slowly, the sun rises, gold spilling across the water, across the sand, across your skin. Warmth fills you, light surrounds you, and you know the return is real. The cycle is unbroken. You are safe within it. Now, let the images fade. Let the sun sink again. Let darkness cover you like a cloak. The gods stand watch. Osiris in the west, Isis in the star Sirius, Horus in the falcon above. They guard you as you sleep. They guide you through the night. Rest, drift, dream. Your name is remembered. Your breath is eternal. Your soul is a star among stars. You are part of the weaving, forever. And as you surrender to sleep, know this: the Nile still flows. The sun still rises. The stars still turn. Egypt endures, and you endure with it, cradled in the circle of time, safe in the eternal return.